The egg had been silent for 512 years. It sat in the center of the grand sanctum of Veldrath, elevated on a pedestal of obsidian carved by the ancient stone weavers of the Morak dynasty. 17 rings of enchanted silver encircled its base. The shell itself was the color of cooling embers, deep amber fading to rust, threaded with veins of gold that occasionally pulsed with a faint internal glow, as if something inside still remembered what warmth was supposed to feel like. Every civilization on the continent had tried. The dragon mages of the Sunspire College had performed the rite of ignition 47 times over the course of a century. Grand Pyromancer Vel the Undying, who had literally burned for 3 days straight without dying, pressed his palms against the shell for 6 weeks and managed to raise the surface temperature by exactly 0 degrees. The High Druidic Council had brought the egg outside during a summer solstice, surrounded it with burning sacred wood, chanted for 11 days, and watched the shell remain stubbornly, serenely cool. The Emberkin, a race of fire-blooded desert people who ran hotter than most forges, tried simply sitting with it. Nothing. The ancient text said the egg belonged to Princess Embra, last of the Ashcrown lineage, a dragon of royal blood whose hatching would herald a new age of fire and wisdom across the known world. The texts also said she would emerge only when the conditions were precisely and perfectly correct. For 5 centuries, no one could figure out what that meant. Noah Mercer had been the egg's caretaker for 3 years, and his primary qualification for the job was that he was cheap. Not unqualified, he had a decent background in artifact preservation, a certificate in ancient relic maintenance from the Aldenmore Institute of Historical Studies, and a genuinely careful pair of hands. But the sanctum's budget had been gutted after the last Grand Mage spent the endowment trying to purchase a prophecy from a notoriously unreliable oracle, and Noah had accepted a salary that made his mother cry when he told her. His daily routine was simple. He arrived at the sanctum at 8th bell. He dusted the silver rings, carefully, always carefully, with a soft brush made of moonhair fur. He checked the humidity levels in the room. He logged the egg's surface temperature in a leather-bound journal. He noted the color of the gold veins, always the same, warm amber, faintly pulsing. And then, because the sanctum was cold and his walk was long and breakfast never seemed to hold him, he ate lunch at his desk, a small wooden table he'd dragged to the corner of the chamber 3 months into the job. Usually it was a sandwich. Sometimes soup in a clay pot if the weather was bad. Once, memorably, leftover potato stew that had made the entire sanctum smell like a farmhouse. Today it was roasted lamb with soft bread and a small jar of herb butter his neighbor Mrs. Calloway had pressed into his hands that morning. "Because you look thin, boy, and someone has to care about that." He unwrapped it at his desk, spread the butter generously, and settled in to read the maintenance logs from 1847, which described in painful detail the Sunspire College's 43rd attempt at the rite of ignition. He didn't notice the egg's veins beginning to glow brighter. It started with a sound. A low, resonant hum, like a cello string plucked somewhere deep underground. Noah looked up from his log, glanced at the egg, and frowned. The gold veins were blazing now, not their usual lazy amber pulse, but a fierce, urgent, beating gold, like a second heart suddenly remembering it existed. He stood slowly. Set down his bread. Walked toward the pedestal with the careful, unhurried gait of a man who had learned very early in this job that sudden movements near priceless ancient artifacts were how you ended careers. He said. The egg cracked. Not violently, not the explosive shattering that 17 generations of fire mages had apparently been expecting. A single clean line ran from the top of the egg to the base, perfectly vertical, and then another perpendicular to it, and then the 4 quadrants simply folded outward like the petals of a flower, each piece settling against the pedestal with a soft, precise clink. Inside, curled in a spiral of smoke and fading warmth, was a dragon the size of a large cat. She was extraordinary. Her scales were the deep red-black of banked coals, edged with orange at the tips that caught the light like a smoldering fire. Her wings, still folded and damp, pressed against her sides. Her eyes, when they opened, were the gold of her shell veins, intelligent, ancient, impossibly aware for a creature that had, technically, just been born. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the silver rings around her pedestal. She looked at the vast, high-ceilinged sanctum with its tapestries and its enchanted sconces and its 5 centuries of failed attempts written into the very stones. Then she looked at Noah Mercer, who was standing 2 feet away with a piece of bread still in his hand. She sniffed. Her nostrils flared. She turned her head, following the scent, and fixed her gaze on the open cloth on his desk, the lamb, the soft bread, the small jar of herb butter from Mrs. Calloway. She made a sound. It was not a roar. It was, remarkably, the exact sound a very hungry creature makes when it has just woken up from a 500-year sleep and discovered that someone nearby has lamb. Noah looked at his lunch. He looked at the dragon. He looked at his lunch again. "Do you want some?" he asked. Later, much later, after the sanctum had filled with scholars and mages and 2 very flustered members of the Royal Historical Council, someone would ask Noah what he had done differently. He genuinely couldn't explain it at first. It was Grand Scholar Thessaly who pieced it together, working through the original Ashcrown texts with a team of translators. The phrase that every civilization had rendered as precisely and perfectly correct conditions turned out to be a dialect idiom from Old Draconic that more accurately translated to something like the warmth of home being nearby, not magical heat, not ritual fire, not enchanted temperature, but the specific, irreplaceable warmth of a meal being prepared or eaten by someone who intended to share it. Dragon eggs of the Royal Ashcrown line, it turned out, were not keyed to fire or power or magical resonance. They were keyed to welcome. To the smell of food. To the presence of someone who wasn't performing, wasn't trying, wasn't wielding anything. Just a person, sitting down, eating their lunch with the particular unguarded ease of someone comfortable enough in a space to simply exist in it. Princess Embra had waited 500 years because for 500 years, everyone who had entered the sanctum had done so as a supplicant, a performer, a seeker. They had come to take something, to be the one who cracked the legendary egg, to claim the glory, to fulfill the prophecy. Noah Mercer had come to do his job and eat his sandwich. He became her official guardian, which the Royal Council clearly hadn't planned for and took 3 months of committee meetings to formalize. Embra made this process extremely clear by refusing to go anywhere Noah didn't go, attaching herself to his shoulder with the focused intensity of someone who has made a 5-century decision and intends to honor it. She was, it quickly became apparent, brilliant, her language acquisition was stunning, building vocabulary in weeks that scholars said should take years. She had opinions. Strong ones. She particularly disapproved of how cold the sanctum kept the bread. "It kills the texture, Noah, this is not a debate," and she was deeply unimpressed by most of the fire mages who came to pay her respects. "They smell of ambition and they keep trying to shake my hand, I have claws, what are they doing?" But she listened when Noah spoke. She sat on his desk while he did his maintenance logs. She curled next to his chair during long afternoons, her coal dark scales gradually brightening as she grew, the orange at her wingtips deepening to gold. And every day at midday, she waited. Because Noah always brought enough for 2. He'd started doing it the second day, without thinking, the way you do when someone has become part of your day, an extra piece of bread, a second portion wrapped in cloth, whatever Mrs. Calloway happened to have made. Embra never forgot that he'd offered her his lunch before he knew what she was. The ancient texts had always said her hatching would herald a new age of fire and wisdom. The scholars had imagined great magic, blazing ceremonies, the kind of beginning that shook the earth. What they got was a man in a worn brown coat sharing his lamb sandwich with a dragon princess on a Tuesday afternoon. It turned out that was exactly the right kind of beginning. The Royal Archives note that Princess Embra, first of the new Ashcrown, issued her first formal decree in the 3rd year of her emergence, that the Grand Sanctum kitchens were to be adequately funded, that bread was to be served warm, and that her caretaker was to receive a salary befitting someone who had accomplished what 5 centuries of civilization could not. Noah Mercer, for his part, said he was just doing his job. Embra found this deeply, entirely, perfectly human, and loved him for it.